Good evening. Welcome to the Federal Webinar. I am K.S. Dakshinamurthy. Very few will contest the view that the film as a medium of communication is probably the most powerful. Moving images have always held a fascination for everyone. Some of the most earth-shaking events in history have been brought to life by cinema. For example, watching the action unfold. And the Germans, Japanese, and the Italians were the villains, while the British showed fascism. Rarely have films been made which show the German people as human beings with a mix of the good, bad, and the grey. Or for that matter, the Allied soldiers who behaved abominably. More recently, if one has seen Hollywood movies on the US invasion of Iraq, you would get the impression that the Iraqis are at fault. They are cruel, with no scruples, while the US soldiers out there trying to save the ordinary Iraqi in the process, sacrificing their own interests. But is it the reality? The movies gloss over the fact that it is the US which invaded Iraq, not the other way around. And wouldn't there be resistance, justifiably? As you walk out of the film after the last scene, you'll come out distinctly tilting towards the US. And yet, some would argue that the movies at least bring to attention the state of affairs in a country that otherwise would not have been possible in any effective manner. This is also the nub of today's discussion in the context of Kashmir Files. While some are hailing the film as a creditable attempt to bring to light the sufferings of the Valley's Pandit community, others are criticizing it as a thinly disguised effort to push the Hindutva narrative at the expense of the Muslim community, which is already at the receiving end of the on their interests. So it's basically really a complex and a layered issue, and where we are talking of a history of depiction of reality in movies that have varied from from the ludicrous to the subtle. In between, you have films that have been very gross. So it's a really a wide range of films that we have seen. To discuss the issue of the thin line in movies which separate reality from propaganda, we have with us 4 individuals deeply involved in films with an enviable track record of dissecting cinema. Uma Vangal Shivkumar is a Fulbright scholar who teaches film at Kenyon College, Ohio, and Asian College of Journalism in Chennai. She also makes documentary films. Her PhD was an analysis of ideological propaganda through film songs on Tamil cinema over a 50-year period. Amit Bahl, based in Mumbai, has acted in almost 100 TV serials in Hindi, English, Marathi, Punjabi, and Urdu. He played the role of Farooq Abdullah in Kashmir Files. Maithili Rao is a film critic, writer, journalist, and English lecturer, formerly based in Mumbai. She has worked in several publications, including The Hindu, Film Comment, and Screen. M.K. Raghavendra is a Bangalore-based film scholar and critic. He won the Swarna Kamal for Best Film Critic in 1997. He is the author of several books on cinema and film criticism, among the latest being Philosophical Issues in Indian Cinema, Approximate Terms and Concepts, published by Routledge. He has authored books on both Hindi and Kannada cinema. So here it is. We have a very, I would say, to use the cliche, a very distinguished panel, but I really mean it. I think they are really people who have worked a lot on films almost all their lives. So welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure having you with us on this Federal webinar. What we do in our webinars is we give time, at least 5 minutes for each panelist to make an opening remark. So let's start with Uma Vangal.
Hi, good morning. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think what stands out when we talk about films is that, as you already mentioned in your opening remarks, there is no dispute that film is a very powerful medium. It has enormous impact on the emotional and the response, the engagement with the screen is very, very strong with audiences. And when it comes to talking about film and propaganda, from the very beginning of narrative cinema, we've always seen that these two are intertwined, though many people may not be aware of it. Historically, we know that with Griffith and the Birth of the Nation, we right away begin to use cinema for a certain representation of nationhood, the notion of political propaganda and ideological it's part of filmmaking from the get-go. So whether it is the Hollywood juggernaut with all its huge budgets at its disposal, making amazingly attractive action films, or whether it is Bollywood, or whether it is the UK film industry, the French film industry, but most importantly also the Russian film movements, all of them have always centered the political in the narrative. And I think this is something that many people don't seem to get. They assume that films are just stories and, it's just the human drama that is played out on the screen. But often what is couched within that human drama is definitely a political position. I think one can confidently say that no film is devoid of ideology or propaganda. It is just the way it is presented, except if it is just a purely romantic comedy or a pure comedy film. Most often, there is a political component somewhere, even if it is unconscious. So there's an unconscious political messaging happening because of the way the industry works, the way films emerge from specific spaces and also appeal to specific audiences. And so in a way, I don't think one can say that film is separated from the political and economic context within which they are made, presented, and engaged with by the audience. Whether it is a Battleship Potemkin, which everyone uses to talk about cinema, which is overtly political and which is overtly propagandic in nature, whether it is something like Full Metal Jacket or Platoon coming out from Hollywood. I mean, almost all the films, Schindler's List, White Nights, or even if you take something like Independence Day, or every Marvel film, every film that's running to packed houses today across the world from the Marvel universe, the superhero films, it's all about how the American system is the best and how America leads the world. I mean, something like in Independence Day, where the American president is the one who shoots down the alien ship and says, henceforth, 4th of July will be World Independence Day. How can it get more political and propagandic than that, right? So in a way, I don't think it's new. It's just that maybe today there's more social media and more sharing of political views across the spectrum in a more public way. We are talking about film and propaganda today, as if it's something never been done before. And this is the first time somebody is using cinema for propaganda. And, some of the kind of discourse that I'm seeing around this film is pretty ignorant in many ways. And in India itself, we have seen, whether it's feature films or documentaries, we have seen very, very politically motivated films being made. I think most of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s are quite aware of the kind of virulent reaction from the government itself when films were being made on the emergency. Whether it was Kissa Kursika or New Delhi Times, we've spoken about these kind of attempts to bring in propaganda. And the documentary and the parallel film world and the documentary movement in India have often had this very clear agenda when they make films, that they are contesting certain political positions, they are countering certain mainstream narratives. So for instance, a film like Final Solution, which was made in, I think, 2001, did very openly speak about the Gujarat riots and tried to bring in a certain critical perspective to what unfolded in Gujarat in those days. So we've had, or whether it was one Nandita Das making Firak or Parzania, any of these films, they've all had a political overtone to it. There have been propagandic in nature, some of it very overt, some of it very subtle. So in a way, I think we've always had films, and I come from the South, I come from Tamil Nadu, I come from the land that perfected the art of using cinema for propaganda, ideological propaganda, and very, very effectively done. And there were many interesting strategies and techniques of filmmakers and the entire collaborative team in Tamil cinema that used cinema very, very consciously for political propaganda. The only, if I really have to make a statement, I think, we've also seen a whole spate of films in recent times with Akshay Kumar leading the brigade, as it were, kind of chest thumping political films, trying very hard to cover it up, but at some level we all knew these were propagandic films. And in the South, I think what happened with MGR particularly, and then later Rajnikant, and now a whole host of aspiring actors who want to enter politics, where they think that this vote bank, this fan base can automatically translate into a vote bank. And so that is one of the reasons why people think film can be very effective as a propaganda machine, especially during election years.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because a colleague of mine from Loyola College, Father Rajanagam, actually did an entire study on the years in which these films were popular and the election years, and see if there was a correlation in, a certain actor being elected as a chief ministerial candidate. And interestingly, he discovered that the years of the elections when some films were unsuccessful, he still won the elections, and the years that the films were successful, he lost the elections. So it's actually very interesting to see that anomaly at work, that the audience has a clear distinction between elections and entertainment. And I think that is something we tend to ignore. Often we tend to talk down to audiences when we become film critics or film scholars or even filmmakers. I see some of the writing on the Kashmir Files by seasoned journalists, and I wonder why they imagine that the audience doesn't have the intelligence to make these distinctions. I think that's one of the things that we underestimate the audience when it comes to propaganda films, because the audience is quite clear what is propaganda and what is a story that they really want to relate to at a human level, at a psychological and emotional level. Having said all that, something like the Rambo franchise or the Rocky franchise in the US was openly political and propagandic in nature. And I think we tend to ignore that every film industry in every part of the world emerges from within a political system. And so one cannot expect it not to have that philosophy or ideology at the heart of it.
Right. Yeah.
How they couch it is different. I just want to say one thing. I think if I have to accuse Mr. Agnihotri of any fault, it would be that it's not great writing. And he ended up coalescing too many stories into one, and it lost its impact. So in a way, if he was attempting propaganda, I think he's failed. But anyway, over to the others. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Uma Mangal. So, Raghavendra, what is your opening? I think you need to unmute your.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
First I'll say that I agree with Uma on this matter extremely, but I think, the point here is that all things are persuasive in some way. This is basically it, right? Now, the point is between persuasion and propaganda, there is a line. It's not a distinct line. For example, you look at the Nazi propaganda films like Yud Süß. I don't know if you've seen this. Yud Süß, anti-Jewish film, propaganda film. It's actually scary kind of propaganda film. If you've seen that, then you wouldn't see. Of course, so is Birth of a Nation is scary, except that it's so outmoded that it makes you laugh. But the point is, but the point is, it is also kind of scary in the way it sort of demonizes certain racial groups and all that. Now, in this particular thing, so what I mean is that if you want to make a distinction, it is not so much between reality and propaganda. There is, as Umar said, there is no such thing as reality in cinema, right? It's always a viewpoint. It's always something. So there's no such thing as reality. The viewpoint would be, this dividing line would be between persuasion and propaganda, right? And I think in this particular area, this new film with Kashmir Files is something new in Indian cinema. It's not in the same thing as a Upkar. Okay, it's not in the same thing as Mrinal Sen. Mrinal Sen also in some highly persuasive, highly ideologically, persuaded in a certain way. But so is Upkar, for instance. No, I just sort of, after I read up something on propaganda, what exactly propaganda is, it seems to be, okay, that the definition of propaganda as opposed to persuasion is, propaganda intends to persuade its receivers about the validity of a given viewpoint. That is true of all, even persuasion, right? Secondly, it is sent on behalf of a political cause or an institution. This is important, right? Thirdly, the recipients of propaganda are a socially significant group of people, and it excludes other people. Okay. So the question is, when Yud Hughes, the thing of White Harlan, I think is the director of the Nazi propaganda film, it excludes, for example, Jews, because it shows the Jews as being absolutely vile. It excludes Jews in that way. Okay. Then it's also false or inappropriate or connected to other beliefs that are somehow misleading or unwarranted. It seems to be the thing. Now, if you look at there's still some, there is some, for example, you can look at Schindler's List, right? Now, Schindler's List is considered a human document in the United States. In the Middle East, it is seen as propaganda, right? Because the entire Jewish question is associated with Israel in some way. And anytime Israel does anything, if it does anything like bombing somebody, some country or some such thing, the immediate talk in their parliament is about, we will not allow another Holocaust to happen again. So Holocaust in some way is cultural capital for Israel, right? It's become cultural capital for Israel. And Israel will use this thing of the Holocaust to justify whatever they do, that we will not suffer another Holocaust. So what happens is, Schindler's List, by playing up this Holocaust thing in a very, whatever way, it has been seen as propagandist by the Arab countries in the Middle East. Okay. Now you come to Indian cinema. Okay. What happens about, say, Manoj Kumar's Upkar, if you take, is that propaganda? Now the point is, Manoj Kumar's Upkar is about the nation. It is meant for an Indian public. So you cannot really say that it is excluding anybody, right? You can't really say it's excluding anybody. It is for everybody. Same thing with the Mrinal Sen's thing. It's a certain ideology, but it does not align itself or exclude certain people. Okay. Unless you say that capitalists are excluded from it as a community. Capitalists are not a community. Okay. They are largely the function, that kind of thing. It is not really a community, the way, for example, Jews would be a community. They're not the same kind of thing. Okay. So you could say neither Mrinal Sen or propaganda, they're highly persuasive. They use it for political, ideological purposes. They want people on their side. They try to win people over their side. But since they are not exclusive in some way, they don't exclude categories or whatever. They're not propaganda. The way you'd use would be propaganda. Okay. Or this thing would be Birth of a Nation is straightforward propaganda. Okay. It would not be propaganda in that way. Okay. Now, if you look at this thing of the Kashmir Files, okay, I don't know if Uma has seen the movie, because I mean, if you've seen the movie, I mean, I sort of, it creates a somewhat different impression on you from just generally believing, talking about propaganda. In this film, for example, it is not simply a human document on the liquidation of the Kashmiri Pandits. Now, that the fact that the Kashmiri Pandits were massacred in Kashmir in around 1990 is not something we can dispute, really. Okay, we cannot say, for instance, the fact that they were killed in large numbers is documented. I don't think we cannot contest that point. And if shall we say, Kashmiri Muslims have suffered also, their suffering does not mean that the suffering of the Kashmiri Pandits should be ignored. Okay, you cannot say Kashmiri Pandits have suffered, so what, Kashmiri Muslims have suffered more. so therefore we should not know. That's not an acceptable position at all. Okay, as a human document, as a subject, it is certainly a worthy subject. Nobody. The question is, how does it go about doing it? Okay. First of all, there's an association of all Muslims with Pakistan. Okay. For example, the very first scene in the movie, is the fact of Sachin Tendulkar being cheered by a Kashmiri Hindu and being virtually, on the verge of being assaulted or attacked or something by Muslims who are not labeled as militants or anything. So there's a general association of all Muslims in Pakistan, in Kashmir, with Pakistan. Okay, and there's a certain demonization of religious, religious slogans. Okay, it's shown in very negative light. Islamic slogans are shown in negative light. So the question finally is that what comes from the movie. You see the movie. I try to look for it. There are so many things there. For instance, when this man he gives a currency note, okay, to a 100 rupee note, the other person returns Pakistani currency. Now, how this man puts it in the film is, I'm giving you Gandhi, you're giving me Jinnah. No, that is not the issue. Okay. The issue here is it Indian currency or Pakistani currency is the basic issue. Your currency note with Gandhi's picture does not represent Gandhi in any way. It is tender, that's all. Okay. It is tender by which you exchange money, you buy something. You go to a vegetable vendor, you buy something, you're not giving Gandhi. You're giving a 100 rupee note. And you're not getting Jinnah in exchange, it's giving you Pakistani currency, right? So the entire thing is, it's turned into that finally, if you look at this movie, it is that Hindus are for the Kashmiri Pandits were for India, which is why they were demonized. The Muslims in Kashmir are for Pakistan, were for Pakistan. Okay. Now there's another problem here. Okay, so what happens is, this is misleading, I'll tell you. See, the question is, it's a point of view which I cannot accept, and I don't know anybody, but the government can afford to accept it. I'll tell you why. Okay, I'll tell you why this is so. Now, the important thing here is, the whole point of view of India in this thing has been that there is cross-border terrorism. Now, this film does not make a distinction between Kashmiri militants and cross-border terrorists or cross-border militants. It does not make any distinction. What it does is, everybody is the same. There's really no difference between the JKLF and the Lashkar-e-Toiba. That is the basic viewpoint of the film. Now, my point is this, okay? Your whole action in Kashmir all the time has been to bring people into the mainstream of electoral process, right? When you're trying to bring people into the electoral process, what does it mean? It means that there are Muslims who have faith in India as a democracy, right? If all Muslims were believed by the nation state in Kashmir to be for Pakistan, how can you bring them into the mainstream? How can you make them contest elections? How can they have faith in the Indian democratic system, right? So this is basically a misrepresentation. Okay, it's a misrepresentation. It would be hazardous, okay, for anybody in the state, any functionary of the state, not to straight away say that this is a misrepresentation. I'll tell you why. Because that would completely destroy all your attempts at bringing Kashmir into the mainstream, right? You have your entire thing is to bring all of Kashmir, not only Kashmiri Pandits, all of Kashmir into the mainstream, okay? Make them contest elections, make them demonstrate their faith in India, right? That is the basic thing. If at the outset you're going to say that Kashmiri Muslims are enemy for Pakistan, you already accepted defeat. Okay, you're virtually saying that we cannot bring them over. You're virtually saying they're ready for Pakistan. Now the question is, this is what I find extremely about the movie, because the movie is not saying that the killing of the Pakistan. I'm not saying that the Pakistani, what happened to the Pakistani, happened to the Pandits. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's horrible. I mean, there's no doubt at all. The fact that Muslims have also suffered from the army or whatever, or from the actions of the state, does not mitigate this, does not make this in any way acceptable, right? But we must understand the discourse in the film, okay? The discourse in the film demonizing a religion thing and straight away remarking them out as for Pakistan is not beneficial to India at any level. So the question is, it is propaganda, and it is propaganda where okay, where a certain section of Indians are excluded, okay, and these are Indians are excluded from the discourse because these Indians are those who India wants desperately into in the mainstream. It wants to make them part of India. It wants to make them win their hearts and souls. Okay, so this I think is a fundamental thing, which is why as propaganda, it is slightly different from the kind of propaganda we've seen in Indian cinema. I mean, Persuasion we've seen in Indian cinema, even the DMK movies, right? DMK movies, I agree with you, it's intended as propaganda, but you don't have that, you don't have that this kind of exclusion of a certain community from there. You don't have that sort of thing. So this
Yes,
is,
okay.
yeah, this is generally what I want to show.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is my point of view. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ranjan. Amit, Mr. Amit Bail.
I really heard what Raghavendra ji had to say and what Uma had to say. First of all, we're debating and we're talking about this film because it's hit box office success. So the point is that a vast multitude of the Indian population has lapped up the film. The film has done extremely well internationally. Okay, so you could call it good marketing, not good publicity, a good strategy, a good campaign analysis, something of on that level. In terms of when we talk about how you're going to sell a particular product, the product has been sold and has been lapped up. A film which is not even 15 crores has made almost about 250 crores, which is something which is extraordinary. We talk about a propaganda film about 3 years ago or 4 years ago. You had another film which was called Uri, the surgical strike, which we all know did also extremely well. You also had films with a big star cast. Uma was also talking about. See, the point is that most of y'all definitely come from the southern part of India. I come from the western part of India, and my roots are inherently in Pakistan because my father was from Multan, and and my mother was from Faisalabad. At that time, it was called Lailpur. Films on partition have done well and not done well. Gadar did well, so now they're making a Gadar 2. They made a film called LOC Kargil, which was a disaster at the box office, which had the biggest stars. Farhan Akhtar made a film called Laksh, even after a very successful film called Dil Chahta Hai, which was again a disaster at the box office. Ajay Devgan and his family made a film called Hindustani, which was again a disaster at the box office. Vidhu Vinod Chopra, who is himself a Kashmiri Pandit, made Mission Kashmir, which was again a disaster at the box office. He again made Shikara, which was a disaster at the box office. Anil Sharma, after having made a superbly popular film like Gadar made Ab Tumhare Hawale Watan Saathi, was a disaster at the box office. On the flip side, we have Mani Ratnam making a film called Roja, which was wonderfully well received in spite of being subtitled, dubbed in other languages. Anand Parvardhan made a documentary. Somebody spoke about, I think Uma spoke about Final Solutions and Barzania. We've also got a film called Harud, and the point at the end of the day is I agree with I have been a part of this film, and ironically or surprisingly, I have not seen the complete film, but because I was dubbing for the film, so I know what the film is all about. I have been to Kashmir very recently. There is an anti-India feeling there. There is definitely an anti-India feeling there. My Innova driver has an anti-India feeling. They're very against Article 370 and Article 35 and all these things being abolished. They call us visitors, which is something which is surprising. I also agree that every country definitely uses its cinema for propaganda. When we talk about, we are also always constantly harping about, we know about what happened, we know about the genocide, we know about the Holocaust, we know about what happened with the Jews. We also, nobody actually knows nobody is able to give a complete definition as to what happened in 1947 when MS Satyu made a film called Garam Hawa, which spoke about the migration of a Muslim family. People are not talking about that. We are only everybody is talking about. So the thing is that we all know there's something called nothing succeeds like success. So if Mission Kashmir was a flop and the Kashmir Files is a hit, there has to be something. There has to be something that is appealing to the audience. We can debate and agree to disagree or disagree to agree that why is a film successful. I agree with Uma when she says, yes, it is not the best work of written fiction. Tashkent Files was a sleeper hit. Vivek made a film called The Tashkent Files. Okay, he is now making the Delhi Files. I think Delhi Files is about what happened in 1984 and what happened to the Sikhs in Delhi during the time when HKL Bhagat and Jagdish Sattler and all these people were there. What he's tried to do is make a film and show it to the audience. The kind of videos that we've seen with people crying and getting appealed, even the Kashmiri Pandits were not touched by this, and the normal people were not touched by this. Why will this film be so successful? See, the point is that why are we not talking about Shikara? Why are we not talking about LST Kargil? Why are we not talking about any other film? Why are we talking about Kashmir Files as a base? Because it's a successful film. The point is that, yes, there are two sides to it. When Raghavendra ji mentioned about this note of Gandhi and Jinnah, I have experienced that myself when I was dubbing for a film called Sheen, which was made by my dear friend Ashok Pandit, where he also mentioned this. I was in Kashmir at that time. And it was a fact that, yes, there were Pakistani notes being exchanged over there. To use the term liberal is very stupid because I feel that we are all educated people over here. We could have our religious ideologies and political ideologies. But the fact is that if film is successful, Anupam Kher is a fantastic actor. He has proved this point. Darshan Kumar has proved the point. Yes, incidents that are whether reference to JNU, whether it is reference to, we all know all that. The fact is that the film is successful, which means there is something in this film, something in the content which has appealed to the audience. And B, like Raghavendra ji said, every government in the state is trying to include the Muslims into the mainstream. Okay, but now the point is that how are you going to educate the youth in Kashmir? One. Two, how are you going to explain to Pakistan that this is an integral part of India? C, are we going to debate about this film just because again Kashmir is going to become a disputed part of the world? No. Israel, West Bank, the Gaza Strip, these are things that we keep on debating about. We all know what the US does is just goes and harps onto any territory. The moment India takes the neutral stance on Ukraine, India is looked down upon. The point is that the first time that an Indian filmmaker has tried to give a certain point of view, that point of view is okay to be debated about. But the fact is that if a vast multitude of people have watched the film, have got affected by the film, have liked the film, irrespective whether it's a well-made film, badly made film, good scripted film, badly scripted film, good end, bad end, every piece of creativity could have its own misgivings, it could have its own flaws. But the fact is that there is something successful, that's why we're debating about it. What we need to talk about, especially now in the post-pandemic times, is that how do we get the world to become a better place and use cinema as a force to increase positivity? Because what Uma said and what Raghavendra ji said are most of the things that I wanted to say. So I'd like to end this and move on to questions so that I can answer my perspective. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Mrs. Maithili Rao, so what's your opening? I think you need to unmute Yeah. You need to unmute. Yeah. You need to unmute. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I agree with what Uma said and what M.K. Raghavendra said, because there's a thin line between persuasion. I think all films are persuasive. They try to be persuasive. And overt propaganda sometimes works, sometimes it boomerangs. But the thing is, there's nothing called a apolitical film, because to say take an apolitical stance itself is a political statement. So there is always the subtext in a film that tells you something that is different from what the film is ostensibly saying to you. So, I mean, take even a lot of popular films like, when, I'd like to give the example of when globalization came to India. And how did this opening of the market as such, and people sitting in their homes had access to cinema from the world, not just Hollywood, if they wanted to. Then how did the cultural, the custodians of pop culture, our soft power actually is Bollywood and popular cinema, to take India to the world outside. And it reassures the home audience also. Then I saw that when these films came, about in 90, there were 3 super successful Hindi films. Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, or Maine Pyar Kiya. Everywhere there was the kind of a reassertion of basic Indian, and here it was Hindu values of the system, of the family coming first. Hitherto, we have been brought up on romantic comedies or films that are love stories, where it's like a Romeo and Juliet or Laila Majnu or Shireen Farhad, who will give up their lives for love, for each other. But here, everybody in Dilwale, the mother tells Kajal, you run away with this boy, and she's willing to give her jewelry. But this especially Raj, the iconic pair of Raj and Simran, he says, no, I have to win the father's approval before I consent and blessing before we get married. So he gets beaten up and all that till finally the father said, Jao Simran, ji le apni zindagi. But the thing is, it is a departure from earlier kind of love story. So it is like going back to as if you're afraid of the globalizing world, which might in a way make youth very, more westernized or away from the Indian cultural values. So through this popular medium, these films are reasserting the value, the validity, the continuing validity of the family and the consent of the elders. So it was, these are all 3 super hit films that way. And, but then it recast the younger generation in a more traditional manner. Outwardly, they're modern, but they're going back to traditional manners. And then in a way, it gives I think there is an element of bringing women back, pulling them back from independence and agency and assertion, self-assertion. So this is also the way popular cinema works in the cultural sphere, but it's also political. This reassertion of the primacy of the family over the rights of the young is a political assertion. You don't want your young to go astray. So this kind of politics has always been there right from the birth of nation, which is so racist. And Odessa step sequence in Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin, which every film student, sees how to do the montage over there and how do you create meaning. And this kind of nationalism has always been there. If you see the political, I'll give you another example from Hindi cinema. Mother India was made a remake of Aurat, which Mehboob Khan had made in black and white. And many people hold that film is superior to Mother India with much more color and a bigger star like Nargis in that. And the mother is made the site of nationalism. She symbolizes the nation as such. But then you see that there again, there's when the film starts, she is made to, the old matriarch is made to, inaugurate a dam. There's a little water streaming down, and suddenly she as the matriarch, respected matriarch, who killed her own son to uphold another girl's honor. In a way, she's a matriarch who's upholding patriarchal values. That's another question. But then her hands are red. But that whole thing of a new India, where the 5-year plans are in progress, that is linked to the old rural story of Aurat that was made in the 40s. So even a film, such a popular, iconic film, takes in the contemporary political and social reality. Otherwise, film cannot survive. Popular cinema cannot survive if it's not a trendsetter, but follows the trends in society. Otherwise, it's out of step with the popular taste. So Amit Bell talked about why was Kashmir Files such a popular film which has made so much of money. Of course, there is this aggressive endorsement by the government giving tax relief in all the BJP ruled states. And then again, I think he did aggressive marketing in the US also. He went and he says he showed it to senators, congressmen, opinion makers, influencers, and then a few Indians. And so his marketing has been very good. And then the thing is, I think the atmosphere, the overcharged Hindu identity now, they have become very emotional issue. Take the hijab issue. Why did it become such a blown up issue? So you're othering the Muslim already. And here is a film that, as Raghavendra pointed out, all Muslims, they're not Kashmiri nationalist Muslims, they're all tarred as Muslims as such, identified with Pakistan, which I think is sending out, I think only reinforcing the kind of messaging that is being, political messaging that is being done. I mean, he says the Muslim votes, they want the Muslim votes. They want to make the Muslims as part of the mainstream, but I'm afraid it is being a part of Indian society as second-class citizens. Forget some of your, forget some of your, you're not a full citizen unless you accept Hindu cultural or own to Hindu cultural values. There is that cultural nationalism is there. They don't call it Hindutva. They say RSS calls it cultural nationalism. And that is what is being, I think, in a way, these films endorse, in a way. Why did Shikara fail? Because it's a little wishy-washy in the sense that it's basically a love story of this Kashmiri couple who come away. But his equally bonding is with his childhood friend, who's become like, he's gone over to the other side. Us par chala gaya, kind of a thing. And he's the one who sends his people and says, ask him to vacate the house because otherwise I won't be able to save you. So he does show this long convoy of vehicles and all of them stationed around the.
We'll come to that. We'll come back to
those things are there in that. And what I found really disturbing about Kashmir Files is he somehow, he trying to discredit the song, Faiz's famous song, Hum Dekhenge, which became the anthem of the anti-CAA protest. See, Shaheen Bagh, I think T.M. Krishna went and sang Hum Dekhenge. He sang the translation into Tamil, Malayalam, and Kannada. That song, it was like the anthem of that we will achieve. And here he shows them she's made like the villain of the piece, the menon, the professor, who's trying to brainwash all the students to her way of thinking. And then they're all fighting for Kashmir needs to be Azad. Arundhati Roy was there. Vedita Menon. Her character is based on these people. These like he's condensed these characters. I mean, Arundhati Roy has never made her think that it's a state terror. She calls state terror whenever the
Ma'am, we'll come back to this, ma'am. We'll just come back to it. Yeah.
Okay.
So no. So the taking off from what Mr. Maitila is saying, it's Uma, you said that in Tamil Nadu the propaganda has been hugely successful in the fact that there have been chief ministers from the film fraternity. So the point here is, do the films make the change, or do the films emerge as part of an already existing situation? So the DMK movement was very strong in the 60s, and the films were an outcome of that. And so, what caused what? The influence of the films on the people, or the context helped the films to do very well. And eventually, you also had people coming in. So similarly, at this point in time, Kashmir Files, as Mr. Amit Bell was saying, that it's a popular film. A lot of people are watching it. It's also because there is an overt push by the state to encourage people to come and see it in terms of tax-free shows and ministers going and seeing it, legislators. So how do you see that in the context of what you also pointed out? Because you raised this question about, how well they do eventually. Yeah.
Well, I think the symbiotic relationship between cinema and politics in Tamil Nadu worked in the way that it fed off each other in several ways. It overlaps. That we all know that no film is made in a vacuum. It always emerges from a socio-cultural, political, historical context. And as Maitli Rao pointed out, at different points in time, whichever film was made, for whatever reason, even if it is a romantic film, there's always one little element of the cultural context that's part of it, or a political, context that is there in the film. But I would certainly say that in Tamil cinema, it emerges. They took a leaf out of Russia, basically, Russian filmmakers, and said, let's make films for propaganda purposes. So they were very clear. Only thing is that they never made the films political. The films were very well-written human dramas, and that worked within the melodramatic format, but had elements that were very uniquely from the Tamil cultural milieu. And so the audience resonated well and got the context very easily without any extra textual explanations. But it is also very much rooted within a certain Tamil psyche, the certain Tamil pride that they have. So it was Tamil nationalism being presented to the Tamil audience. And I would disagree with Mr. Raghavendra when he said Tamil cinema or the DMK films didn't other anybody or didn't create exclusionary perceptions. It was very clearly located within an anti-Hindu, anti-Brahmin, and a very, very clear goal to other, and say that if you want to be, if you want to see social reform, if you want to access certain things as an oppressed subaltern, oppressed community, you have to bring the DMK to power. I mean, essentially, that's exactly what all those films were trying to say. It may not seem like that, but that's what it was all about. And a large section, and like Amit pointed out, a large section of the audience agreed and went with that philosophy. And that's exactly the reason for the DMK's success, but not necessarily through the films. Irrespective of these films, these people would have been successful at the hustings. The reason the films only play one element of an entire propaganda machine that was at work. They used theater, they used songs, they used party symbols, they had amazing discourses, if you want to call it that. The political speeches themselves were literary masterpieces. Karunanidhi and his alliterative dialogues, not just in films, but also in his electoral speeches. And all of them, whether it was Jayalalitha, they had to be brilliant public speakers in order to succeed. So it's not just the films. So in that sense, I don't think I would attribute the entire success of the rationalist movement or the DMK to cinema, but cinema was an effective tool to take it to larger numbers of people. And in that sense, just like Kashmir Files, is finding resonance with audiences across the world. And I think it's very interesting to see the success of this film in the South. We have been largely insulated, right? Almost from the horrors of partition, or let's say the Kashmir issue. I mean, if you can watch Mani Ratnam's Roja, you realize what a ridiculous film it is, right? It just simplifies this huge issue into just this silly little thing about this woman trying to get her husband back from the terrorists. And there's one iconic dialogue between the terrorist leader and the one who abducts and the abductee, and they're having this conversation about India and nationhood. And you have, of course, that ridiculous sequence of him trying to put out the fire in the national flag. And, Mr. Mani Ratnam has a whole lot of issues also. So, it's a reflection of the superficial understanding of several issues in Kashmir, in Pakistan, in West Bengal or the Northeast, again, Mr. Mani Ratnam in Dil Se. So you realize that this kind of, there's almost a sense of discovery that is happening with Southern audiences in Kashmir Files. It's like, oh my God, this has happened in India, and we were not even aware of it. I mean, I've had friends who've been sharing after watching the film that they feel guilty, that they were just sitting around enjoying a brilliant life, happy, while this was happening to people in Kashmir. So I think this whole idea that, and I don't believe that when you watch the film, there's an anti-Muslim sentiment being whipped up as much as an anti-Pakistan sentiment that is being whipped up. And I think that in a way, what Raghavendra pointed out about the Gandhi and Jinnah, and I think audiences are smart enough to realize it is not about Gandhi or Jinnah, and that it's about India and Pakistan. And I think, again, like I said before, we underestimate the audience when we have these discussions and things like that. And I think what is more interesting for me when it comes to the Kashmir Files, as opposed to our own experience in the South with political films, is that the discourse within the film and the discourse outside the film, right? So there's a huge difference in the way it's happening. For us, the discourse in the film in Southern India, in Tamil cinema, for instance, the discourse within the film was more of reinforcing something we already knew, and reinforcing something that was already churning within our society. And so we could connect and say, when he sings certain songs, we know what those songs are referring to. We know who those songs are talking about. Whereas with the Kashmir Files, I think the discourse is beginning to only now begin. The film did not indulge in discourse. The film was trying to, I think, just stun the audience and just put all this information out and say, take a look, this happened. And I think that is probably one of the reasons for the success of the film. Yeah. Even though, like I pointed out, from a filmmaking point of view, it's not great film craft. It could have been better as a documentary, perhaps, or it could have been better if they had fixed one story, made it really emotional, and then told us, well, there are thousands of stories like this. It's not just one. Right. Here, his attempt to bring all these stories into one, I think, kind of is very, it's like, too much for us to take in. That itself has, I think, helped the film in some ways.
Yeah, get it. Raghavendra, how do you react to this, view that it's not exactly about the Muslims, but it's more the, Pakistan that's being,
It's about the Muslims in Kashmir, their relationship with Pakistan. It's not about Pakistan, okay? I mean, they don't, I mean, the very fact that you don't make a distinction between Pakistan, I mean, there's a line in the films which says, whether you're Pakistani across the border or with this side of the border, doesn't make any difference. There is a line like that. Okay, whether you're JKLF, it doesn't make you're all like this, you're all that kind of, there is that kind of remark is there. So this is an equation of Kashmiri Muslims with Pakistan, right? But I'll go along with Amit about this thing, that I think this film would have been a hit even without government patronage. Okay. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it would have been a hit. My estimation is the film, for whatever its emotions are, would have been a hit even without government patronage. I don't think it needs government patronage. But that has nothing to do with right or wrong, with propaganda or not propaganda. All the Nazi propaganda films were super hits. Battleship Potemkin was a flop. It was running to empty houses. Okay. The films which were doing well was Thief of Baghdad with, I think, who's the guy, Errol Flynn? Thief of Baghdad was doing well in Russia, in Moscow, when Battleship Potemkin was running to empty houses at the height of the revolution. Okay. So it doesn't have very much to do with, Eisenstein was an artist of some sort. He was trying to make inventions. He was doing this. He was doing that. Your Griffith was a super hit with this one. Yeah, the Intolerance was a flop, but this was a hit. Yeah, it was a big hit. Okay. So the question is, the fact that it is a hit does not mean, okay, you cannot take that to mean that its message is correct, right? Okay, you just have to have a large number of people coming and watching the movie. And if it is cashing in on very emotional issues at that point, we cannot deny the fact that India is now divided up into very emotional things. Within the same family, there are people on this side and there are people on that side. And people within the same family are not on speaking terms with each other. I'm talking about brothers not on speaking terms. This sort of thing has happened today, right? So the chances are, well, there'll be this film within the same family, it will create fissures and that sort of thing. But the point is, obviously, it will draw huge crowds. There's no doubt at all. I don't think that his marketing would have been good, but I don't credit his marketing with having done it. The film has very strong content, I'll say, very strong content. Okay, which your other films didn't. That Shikara or something didn't have that kind of strong content. Emotionally strong, based on the contemporary thing, right? That was some kind of wishy-washy, sentimental kind. This is not like that. Okay, this works like that. Okay, and something about the DMK. You know, one thing about basic difference between DMK, I agree with you. Okay, they did something with the Brahmins. I was wrong in the sense you cannot say that it was. But the point about DMK is that this film, when they did this anti-Brahmin thing, okay, it's not anti-Hindu as much as anti-Brahmin. Brahmin being the custodian of the temple kind of thing. It's anti-Brahmin. But the point is that particular thing, when the Brahmins were the height, right? The Brahmins were the, shall we say, the upper echelon, right? So when you're attacking the upper echelon, it becomes some kind of politically subversive in some sense. I don't know whether you accept it or not.
Sorry. I mean, it's just that I don't think it was the Brahmins alone. They were definitely targeting all the upper caste. But then the focus became more of the Brahmins, though the Brahmins were really not the upper.
Yeah, they were not. They didn't own land. The other guys owned land, so something like that. So whatever it is, they did that. But by consensus or whatever, okay, Brahmins today are blamed for everything in India. It's called Brahminical, means the Brahmins are responsible kind of thing. That's actually become a convention. It's not really the truth as much as a convention. Everybody accepts it. Okay. So another thing I want to talk about is Roja. Okay, the Roja issue. Is the Roja in Tamil is very different film from in Hindi, you know.
Not
Roja,
really. It is just
I'll tell you what's the difference. When this woman, Roja, collars an English soldier, okay, shouts at him in Tamil, it has a different meaning from shouting at him in Hindi. Okay. When he shouts at him in Tamil and he speaks only Hindi, you're telling him, look, I am Tamil, I don't give a damn about your Hindi or whatever. Okay. I'm not involved. So the husband in that film is playing the Indian card. Okay. The wife is playing the Tamil card. Okay, that's a completely different kind of thing from watching the Hindi version, right? It can mean something completely different, right? And when she does that, it's actually speaking with a forked tongue. It's not really one tongue at all, okay?
Radhika sir, can I interrupt in the middle? In the middle? I agree with Uma when she says, so Mani sir is a very respected filmmaker, but whether it is Bombay or whether it is Roja, he has treated with. See, I'm a Mumbaikar. I live in Mumbai. So when we talk about, so he has treated both these issues, whether it's the Kashmir issue or the riots in Mumbai, on a very trivial, very, very frivolous level. So forget about what the lines in Tamil mean, what the lines in Mumbai mean. Because we've been witness to what happened in 1992, the blast and so on and so forth. So I just like to, it's easy to sensationalize and make it very glamorous and use Remark's music and great visuals and great camera work. But the fact is that he has definitely made both these issues very frivolous. And I agree with Uma when she says the conversation between the terrorists, Pankaj Kapoor played the terrorist. So these are certain things that, and I shouldn't be saying this. The fact is, yes, that I'm in Maharashtra, but the southern states really, really sometimes do not understand what is actually happening there. What is actually happening there, what is happening in Punjab, what is happening in Kashmir, what is happening in Bengal, what actually happened in Gujarat. So, let's not get into the dialogue part of it as to what she says in Tamil and what not, Mani Ratnam definitely has made the issue look very frivolous. Sorry.
Okay. So,
Can I just add to what Amit said?
Yeah.
Because Mani Ratnam's best film that way is the one where it's set Kannathil Muttumittar. There is that Sri Lankan girl who's, he's adopted, the journalist who's adopted a girl from the refugee camps and brings her up with her own children. And the child wants to see her own mother, who was an LTTE fighter. And that was played by Nandita Dar.
Yeah.
There is so much more truth in the emotions felt in that. Because whereas in Roja, and I agree with the Tamil, she's shouting at that man in Tamil. In Hindi, when she's shouting at him, it doesn't have that much of an effect because her feeling so isolated in this place and she wants to get her husband back. And another thing, visually, what Roja does is when it shows Pankaj Kapoor, the militant, you see him doing his namaz and getting, that overstressing his Muslim identity over there, which was not necessary.
Absolutely.
That was the only point that I wanted to make about it.
Amit, this point about the popularity of Kashmir Files, we are also in an age of social media, and probably we are witnessing some of the maximum usages of social media in every which way. The kind of push that social media gave Kashmir Files, that must have really played a big role. I mean, what's your take on that?
I agree with you. The film was supposed to originally release on the 26th of January. Then we came to the third wave of COVID, right?
Yeah.
I think Vivek played it very smart. Vivek, Z Studios and the producers, they played it very smart. They delayed the release because of the third wave of COVID. They went to the US and they spread, because there have been especially a lot of Kashmiri Pandits who, of course, were influential, well-to-do till the late 80s and the early 90s when they were asked to make the exodus. They went there. They showed it, like Uma said and what Maithili ma'am said, they showed it to senators. So, जिसको हम हिंदी में कहते हैं फिल्म को दे गरम कर दिया. They made the film, the kind of interviews that they did on social media, whether it was Instagram, whether it was Twitter, whether it was Facebook, and these were genuine. You had actually elderly Kashmiri Pandits, women crying, and you could make out their Kashmiri Pandits because they have a certain garb that they wear. That definitely inspired and sparked a lot of interest among people. Then when it started with about 400, 500 screens, because they were pitted against youth people, then word of mouth publicity, social media and word of mouth has played a very, very, very big hand in the success of the government subsidies, the pro-BJP, the pro-Hinduatva, the RSS, the VHP. All that is secondary. That comes much later. But social media and word of mouth publicity has played a big hand in the success of the film. Because see, we'll go and watch people are going and watching an RRR or a Spider-Man or a Batman or a so-and-so at $700 a ticket, $800 a ticket. But what has happened is that many of the single screen theaters in B and C centers, which would have shut down, they've been revived. They've got a second lease of life because of Kashmir Files. So that's a big thing. So word of mouth publicity, social media campaigns, not only in English, in all regional languages, has played a very, very, very big part. And obviously, it's made the producers very happy, and the cash is still ringing in. So this is what I personally feel. It's a great marketing campaign. Irrespective, like Uma said, every piece of creativity has its flaws. But nothing succeeds like success. So at the end of the day, yes, the strategies worked.
Why are we in the first place even talking about Kashmir Files? Because it has moved it has kind of broken the ceiling, so to speak, on the way similar films have been made in the past. But some of it has also caused alarm in the sense that there were several posts on social media displaying the kind of reaction of viewers after watching the film. Where there's a kind of hate speech and all that. Where they're saying things about the Muslim community and all that. It's in a sense that it probably not probably it did transcend from the film world into the real world, and there was this kind of this transgression. I think probably alarmed a lot of people. It's still videos are doing the rounds, and probably I think this really the cause for the kind of concern. And also if you see for instance discussion on the movie and all that, you don't see much of it happening. And then yesterday we see getting into the political space with Kejriwal and vandalization of his house. So somewhere it has gone beyond the film. It's not remained within the confines of the theater. So how do you see this? I mean, and in fact, aren't we? I mean, isn't that the reason why we are even talking about propaganda in that sense? From that point of view.
Can I come in here?
Yeah.
Can
No,
I come in here?
Amit, we can start with Amit.
Yeah.
I think, that is unfortunate. That is something that I don't think that is something in Vivek or Pallavi's control. Okay. So as makers, I don't think they're responsible for this. It's overall when we talk about the way the ecosystem is and the scenario in the country is right now, and internationally also. I think it's an effect to do with all that. The COVID has made people go on their nerves edge to what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in Israel, what is happening overall. So I think people are losing their patience. I don't think the makers, this was their intention. The intention of the makers was to definitely make people aware of what is the actual reality as to what happened from 88 to 91. Now, neither Vivek Agnihotri, nor Pallavi Joshi, nor Z Studios, nobody wanted this fireball effect or the lowball effect to happen. What is happening is unfortunate, and I think somebody needs to come and take control of this entire thing. And you can't be, I mean, I have made a statement. I suppose if I have made a Schindler's List or I have made a Roja, suddenly created an uproar, I could be morally responsible up to a certain level, but I can't be responsible for this entire thing to really snowball and to go into something else. So that is something that maybe they weren't even aware, or they weren't even prepared for the success of the film. They wanted to prove a point that this is what we want to make. We made the Kashmir Files, which was a sleeper hit, which did create ripples. We made the Kashmir Files, which we hope will create more ripples. We are going to make the Delhi Files, which we hope will be doing a better film. This snowballing effect and politicizing of this entire thing. They have not spoken about a film which is going to be anti-Hindu Muslim. Yes, we are all in a position right now, as we are sitting here as two Indians. Yes, we are very, very upset about what Pakistan is doing to us. We need to have a strong dialogue with Pakistan, which we understand. But the fact is that it's going to become a Hindu-Muslim issue. People are going to get so sentimental. People are and somewhere down the line, I think it's also education, awareness, and a certain level of fanatism, which I don't think all of us on this panel have any control on. So that is something that we can all get together and create a campaign that, listen, this is not about it, because everybody, like Mr. Ramakrishna also said, Raghavendraji said, there is propaganda, there is hidden agendas. The fact is that I've made a film, I've proved a statement. Films are a big part of our social strata. My film is successful. It has evoked certain emotions. Now, who is going to take a control on the emotions is something that I don't have a control.
Right. Okay, I take that. So, Mrs. Rao, Maitli.
Yeah. Let me be cynical and say this is actually preparing the ground for 2024 elections. Already there is that conscious effort to make a Hindu bloc, voting bloc. get over because they know that if it goes by the caste equations, and then UP proved it, that the caste equation didn't really work in the election. So it was more like people deserted Mayawati and certain other castes went it with the BJP. So I think it was not a conscious, I don't think Agnihotri made that film that way, but the way the film works in making Hindus feel, that is, they say like India is like a Hindu land. So in these people in Kashmir, and sorry, excuse me, the people speaking about pre-Mughal, pre-Islamic Kashmir. So that was a Hindu Kashmir at that point. So, people are going back to that, this thing in the discourse. So then I think, so that's why it resonates with Hindus, I think, who are open to persuasion, to be, emotionally charged by viewing this film, because these are atrocities that he is packed in, which I think, in a way, no censor would have passed that sawmill vivisection scene. The people have, I think, have become a little more liberal about showing sex, in a way, suggested sex in the Indian films, but they've been cutting down on violence. But this violence,
that's why it's got an
A certificate.
It's got an A certificate.
Even for an A certificate, I think the level of violence in the film that is shown graphically, my friend who went and thought she couldn't watch it, she was just putting her head down. She says, I can't watch that scene. So, there is that kind of, so it creates that, among all the rasas, that bhipatsa and all that. So I think this film evokes that at that point. And I think it sort of it is trying to make a cross Hindu connection across language, across caste. So I think it will help in the BJP in creating a Hindu bloc. That is my reading of the recent political.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Raghavendra, what's your...
I would agree. I think that it has a certain political purpose, this film. It has a political purpose. If you look at, for example, Vivek Agnihotri's career, they're generally, is aligned with the ruling party, right? Kashmir, this thing, what's it called? It's been aligned. The next one also, 1984, is also aligned with the ruling party. So the alignment is fairly clear. His career is progressing along a political path in some way. He's not an independent filmmaker, unaligned independent filmmaker. So if you say that 2024, I see no reason to contradict that. It seems to be. So the point is, he has a political role to play, and the film is a political tool, in my opinion. Okay, and whatever it does, it's also getting support that way. The point is, whether it's good for India, good for the thing, it's a different issue altogether. It's good, but it is a political tool, and it's performing its political function. So I guess, I cannot really disagree with that at all. Yeah. So I guess that's the thing. And not only that, see, the point is, it's disingenuous to actually say that we make the film, it's in the public space, whatever happens, we are not responsible. It's disingenuous. There's no point even debating this point, right? There's no point at all. Now, to say we make a film, it's an incendiary film. Let's put it, it's incendiary. You make an incendiary film as if it is no discourse, okay? It's presenting the truth, okay? It's got a discourse, and that discourse can be interpreted by anybody, okay? As not neutral. It's not neutral, okay? Once again, this entire business of saying, I don't care what it is, this the film is showing. There is film criticism. There is such a thing as discourse. You understand what this means. You interpret a certain thing. You interpret a certain. For example, you take Garam Hawa. Okay. Let's take Garam Hawa. Right. Is it neutral between India and Pakistan? Just I'm not saying it's propaganda or whatever. Right. Okay. Now let's look at a certain thing in Garam Hawa. Right. In Garam Hawa. Okay. It is people leave for Pakistan. Some people stay behind in India. Right. No, it doesn't mean. Are they saying that Pakistan and India are both equal? No. Why? Because the mother stays behind with the son in India. What does that mean? Mere baap maa hai. Okay. Mere saath maa hai, which is your diwar thing, right? Mother is the site of virtue. Wherever the mother stays is the site of virtue, right? If the mother stays behind in India, India is the virtue space, not Pakistan. Okay. I'm not in any way criticizing this, but the point is, this is a discourse. You cannot ignore the fact that the mother has stayed behind in India. Similarly, every single, shall we say, sign in the film can be interpreted. And I tell you, it has a certain purpose. It has a, you cannot say, I just told a story. You're not telling the story. It's full of messages. This film is loaded with messages, far more than something like what is it called, Mani Ratnam. Okay. So the question is, I mean, we can't be so innocent as to believe we just made the movie. If the public space, they take it as this, we cannot really do anything. We can't go like that. It has a certain, it is very, very strongly messaged. It's strongly coded, this film. Okay. Now the point is, it has a certain political purpose. I cannot really think about that. The subject itself is fine. Okay. We cannot, it could have been a human, it's not really a humanistic, human interest subject anymore. It's become a political subject and it's used as a political way in this film. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Uma.
Well, I think I mentioned this right at the beginning, that this is overt propaganda. And I don't think there's any two ways to think about this film. And, Amit is right in saying, to some extent, because he's an actor. I mean, so in his case, it's just a film he's done. So that is different. But I think the filmmaker would have definitely been conscious that, and he did have an agenda, that this is a political film and I am conveying certain things with this. I want to shock my audience into recognizing certain things. But I think the other, to get back to what we were discussing, and it's like even Mr. Mani Ratnam, he is not ignorant of any of these issues totally. But the way he chooses to present the film in a very superficial way certainly means that as a filmmaker, he's making a conscious choice not to treat it in all its layered and nuanced way, because for him, these are just backdrops in which he can tell his story. And he wants to be seen as a secular filmmaker who wants to make films about what he called the terror trilogy or whatever, right? But Kannathil Muttamital, for instance, since Ms. Maitri Rao brought it up, created a whole lot of issues in Tamil Nadu because he trivialized something that the Tamils knew very well about. Right? By making it a film about adoption in Sri Lanka and then bringing in the LTT issue, bringing in Tamil, terrorism in Sri Lanka, and making it such a silly, facile way to just walk into Sri Lanka and war-torn Sri Lanka with this young girl. So there were a lot of issues about the film, and there were repercussions for him in Chennai. I think all of you know there was a bomb hurled at his house. It created a whole lot of issues which he didn't intend. So in some ways, what Amit said is also possible, that sometimes even if the filmmaker didn't intend something, the repercussions could be different. How the audience responds to it and picks up that and moves with it emotionally is something that we really don't have control over, right? Whether it's an overt propaganda film or whether it is just a film that uses certain context, right? But I think one of the things, some of the things that Amit mentioned, I would agree that I think also one of the reasons that this film has found so much patronage among the audience, aside from the content, aside from that, I think it's just that people were so fed up of not being able to watch films on the big screen. And so in a way, the timing was just propitious. It was just fortunate for the filmmaker and the team that people just wanted to go out and watch a film on the big screen. And I'm seeing a very similar response in RRR. I don't know, people are talking about Vivek Agnihotri and his political alignments, which are very obvious. But it's very interesting for me when I was watching RRR, and I was like, oh my God, this is like, BJP could have funded this film. So it was almost like watching a Hindutva film, even though, it had Ramayana, it had Mahabharata, it had Bhim, it had, it had Telugu nationalism, it had so many things in one film. And I think that's always been a fact in Indian cinema, that we do have all these identities that will be there in every film, so for me, I think one of the things that really stands out, one, the social media, yes, there was all kinds of things happening all over social media. People have become polarized in not just in India, across the world, but in India particularly, the polarization is so strong right now that it is bound to evoke these kinds of responses. Any film made with certain elements in it is bound to evoke these kinds of strong sentiments. And again, it is very unfortunate, of course, that some people are taking control over this kind of response and saying, and there was also all these memes that are making the rounds that they don't even know that, somebody watching RRR and coming out with saying Ram, 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 when actually it's Alluri Sitaram Raju, and the visualizing is very similar to Ram.
Yeah.
So these kinds of things happen.
Sure.
Appropriation will happen.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. This is probably just the final question, and just a brief kind of an answer. This film is positioned on the premise that there is some kind of a secret and which is being exposed, which is the treatment of the Pandit. But in reality, that information is always available. It was well covered during the 90s. There was no attempt by anyone to hide anything as far as this story is concerned. It is just that, like many other events, people generally tend to lose touch. Or people generally, this habit of reading and trying to look up, say, facts or look up events in the past. I think not many people do it. And when there is some event like this which is projected in all its details, it's just the feeling that, oh, I didn't know about this, and all these things have happened. It's not that it was a secret. So how do you respond to this? Because there is this perception that there was something hidden and it's been exposed, which is really not the case. That's all.
Here, I think that, I would not agree with you on this point. I think this entire thing has been slightly pushed under the carpet. I think so. Okay. Because this is not something which has been. Look, I'll tell you this. Let us say this, right? Look, politics in India, the only reality in politics is caste. Okay, in India, this is my view, right? Only caste is real. Religious divides are not real. Okay, they have been exploited by politics, and this is, I'm not talking about now. It has happened right from the beginning. Okay, that they've been right from the 1947. Religious divides have been, and gradually it's got worse and worse and worse. So for that particular reason, even like, for example, even while they are talking secular and they are talking all this now, they're still playing this, look, this entire word appeasement is not an unfair word. Okay. It's not an unfair word. Okay. We have to accept that thing has been there. Now, the point is it has recoiled in some way. It has gone the other side and the other side has become, but the point is, a lot of political parties in India, and not only the ruling party, have benefited by religious divides. Okay, this I cannot really go along with. So
no, as an event. What I meant is as an event.
If you're aware of this, yeah. There was a French journalist who was going around taking pictures of what happened to the Pandits, right? And the Pandit massacres. I don't know. I remember his name. He was going around exhibitions, which was actually
François Gauthier.
Yeah. He was showing around these pictures. So the point is, I attended a thing. He showed that there was a lot of, he showed these pictures. He was obviously supported by the Hindu right wing. But the point is, there's nothing wrong in showing these pictures. But at that particular point, it was generally, people immediately saw this as a right wing ploy. Okay, and I'm talking about a liberal group. Bookshops are always full of liberal groups, right? So at that particular point, these liberal groups generally resented the fact that this man was showing this, and he was booed virtually. So why should they boo him? I don't really. Can you tell me what is wrong with this particular thing? Why should this thing of showing photographs from that François Gauthier? Yeah, that's several years ago. So I think like there has been as a. I'm not going to say that there has been no concealment. It's not concealment, but it's generally a sort of linking. Like, for example, one of the Kashmir politicians said, so many more Muslims have died. That's not the issue at all. Okay, you have to accept the fact that it was a tragedy, and I regret the fact that this tragedy took place. We have done our best. Whatever personally I have come in, whatever we have done, anything I've seen that we have tried to see this. We have come and tried to protect our Hindu brethren. Something like that should come, right? That kind of statement I would welcome, and I would value that kind of statement. But
See,
you know, yeah.
So any
can I come in for a second?
Yeah, I think
One-
we're just
just a
coming to
second.
that. You can
What
just
Raghav-
briefly,
what Raghav-
no, you can just briefly respond and then we'll.
Once I just, see, the fact is, Rahul Pandita wrote a book, about the book ending with gut thoughts. This new generation, we see the generation that all of us are talking about. We were aware because the newspapers were a big source of inspiration and the news that we got. There is a certain disparity that this new generation has in terms of what actually happened, whether it was the LTT crisis, whether it was Kashmir, whether what happened to Rajiv Gandhi, what happened in Maharashtra. There is no actual documentation that the new generation is actually what happened and what should be the solution. The new generation, including my son, including the people who are growing up, after maybe watching a Kashmir Files or watching, now for example, when I was in, there's a Turkish serial called Argatul or something, which talks about this Argatul Ghazi or something of that sort. The Muslim population is watching that, they have a different perception. People who are watching the right-wing videos have a different perception. People who are reading right-wing books have a different perception. Then we've suddenly, in the last 10 years, got this new term called the liberal and the left-wing, which was never there before. So somewhere down the line, there has to be some balance. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
That's
Any,
all.
any other brief comment, Uma or Maithili? Hello.
Well, I think we were talking about censorship. If I remember, Maithili ma'am had mentioned censorship, that this film got through it. And I wanted to mention that, in the past few years, maybe a full decade or more now, we have been seeing the rise of catering to the Bebatsa Rasa across languages. So it is not restricted to Kashmir Files, honestly speaking. I mean, at least in Tamil cinema, we've definitely spoken about this. We talk about it as the cinema of disgust in the past 10 to 15 years. And so I think the Bebatsa Rasa is not new as an appeal, and it has become a bit of a franchise, in fact, in recent years. And also what was very interesting for me was yesterday, the UAE cleared Kashmir Files after 4 censor board review sittings. And it cleared the film without any cuts, and it's going with all its gory sequences to UAE audiences. I mean, what people are calling gory sequences, right? I mean, some of us are also looking at it as a documentation. And if the Hindu Holocaust Museum in Mumbai is something many of us didn't even know about, right? And now we know because of the end credits in Kashmir Files. And so I think there's value to some of the information that this film is giving. But also, again, I would completely agree with Raghavendra in the sense that I think there has to be some kind of, and you know what the liberals always accuse the right wing of, whataboutery? They are indulging in that right now when they talk about the Kashmir Files. It's like, he said, so many Muslims died. So I think somewhere there has to be more introspection among filmmakers, among politicians, among audiences, among all of us. Where are we going as a nation? Where are we going as a society? So in a way, I would say Kashmir Files is tapping our conscience at some level,
right?
Even if that was not the intention.
Right. Maithili,
I don't think people forgot, at least my generation didn't forget what happened in Kashmir. Because I remember the Times of India had series of articles about the living conditions of these Pandits in those camps. And most of them were pretty well educated and were well-to-do when they left Kashmir. So, it's like now you say the Ukrainians going to Poland. And there is, again, they said there's an implied racism. Oh, these are not Syrians and immigrants coming from Africa and, sort of flooding Europe. These are fellow blonde, blue-eyed Europeans like us, So that kind of a feeling was there. And here what had happened was, at that point when all this was happening from 90 to 91, there's so much of happening, and we didn't have 24/7 television to cover the stories, like how Ukraine, every day what's happening, whether you want it or not, it's there on TV, what's happening in Ukraine. and our own correspondents going there. So that is one thing where it just sort of got not brushed under the carpet. It's somewhere in the back of, it's one of the things that happened, unfortunate things that happened, and it's been forgotten. That way, Kashmir Files has revived that memory that this is something very tragic that should not have happened in the country.
Right.
And I agree with Uma about what about rape, because there is a thing that between 47 before the partition, actually, the biggest exodus was Muslims from Jammu. The Raja Hari Singh and the Dogra army drove out a whole lot of Muslims first to Sialkot, sent them across what would be the border. So there was, and a whole lot of them were not just exodus, but many were killed with the connivance of the Maharaja, they say. That's one of the interpretations. There is a difference between Dogras and Pandits. There is again an internal kind of a thing. And then there was no social media now.
Right.
There was no social media in those days now to keep things alive.
Right.
And this also could be momentary. Something else sensational comes that will occupy the whole of, and the WhatsApp university will start sending out things, and then you have to sift. So it is the whole ecosystem of media has changed right now. So that it's what you see visually, graphically, and what you read, very well written reports, there's a vast difference in that, the impact it makes on you.
Yeah,
but I do remember the series of articles in the Times of India.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have, really, I think, run out of time. Really crossed a lot of lines, and thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.